Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today our commander is Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths. Thanks to InKing727 for requesting this commander. Due to the debacle surrounding the War of the Spark novel Forsaken, Magic's fiction suffered for a while, and Theros Beyond Death took the brunt, as the full-length novel that had been written for the set was never released. Because of that, Atris doesn't have a lot of lore associated with him other than the fact that he's a mysterious oracle who's able to bestow supernatural gifts to the heroes of Theros. However, embedded in his oracle text is a little hint at additional lore. Ironic, right? Now, we don't know that this is canon, but maybe that's appropriate for an oracle of Phoenix, the god of deception. Anyway, I'm excited to share what I put together for Atris, but before we get started, let's go over our deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I thought it deserved a deck of its own. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever my commander asks of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play to the game plan, sometimes none at all, and I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands. That way I can always hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play commander. So let's talk about our commander. Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths, is a 3/2 legendary human advisor for 2, a blue, and a black. Atris has Menace, and when Atris enters, target opponent looks at the top 3 cards of our library, and then separates them into a face-down pile and a face-up pile. One pile goes into our hand, and the other into our graveyard. I really loved Theros Beyond Death when it was released, and Atris has always been a creature I've wanted to build around. Minigame mechanics like Atris' Enters trigger are always fun, but in this case, they're more than just a chance to put a card or 2 into our hand. This effect isn't just fact or fiction, as FOF gives both players perfect information from which to make their decisions. With Atris, we don't know what's in the face-down pile, and our opponent doesn't know what's in our hand to help them decide how to build their piles. We're both seeing different sides of the mystery. So how do we choose which pile is best for us every time? Well, when you supplicate yourself before an oracle, you have to know what it is that you want. That frames the question we're asking and the advice, trustworthy or otherwise, that we're getting. If we're careful, we won't make Croesus' mistake. Our deck is a fun combination of recursion and rebuy effects. We have powerful creatures we want to get into our graveyard so that we can reanimate them to the battlefield, then blink them or bounce and recast them once they're in play. As usual in Reanimator, we aren't as concerned about our creatures dying because we can always get them back, but we need a way to get them into the graveyard in the first place, and that's what Atris does for us. He gives us cards in hand and cards in the yard, both of which can lead us down a path to victory. It just depends on which of those futures we choose to pursue each turn. Here's how we figure it out. When Atris enters, we choose an opponent to be his mouthpiece. We want to avoid an opponent who we know has ways to counter our spells or reanimate creatures from our graveyard, as well as opponents who just show the table what they see in order to outsource their choices. This is meant to be a personal spiritual revelation and a surprise for everyone else, so we should pick someone who wants to be part of that fun. As long as we can avoid any wet blankets at the table, we also want to change which opponent we choose to make piles each turn that we get an Atris trigger, keeping predictability low and letting everyone feel like they get a turn at the Omphalos. Then, our chosen opponent will show us 1 or 2 cards, with the other card or 2 face down. We choose the face up pile if A, what we see is something we definitely need, be it a land or an enabler like a reanimation spell or a blink effect. Or B, if we have a reason to believe that the face down pile has something we want to go in our graveyard, like a powerful creature or a spell we can flash back. On the other hand, we choose the face down pile if A, we definitely want what's in the face up pile in our bin, or B, if we aren't interested in the face up pile and we have plenty of mana and we're low on ways to use it. And if we're just hungry for card advantage, the choice is even simpler. We take the face up pile if we see a draw spell or a blink spell which we could hit Atris with, or we simply take whichever pile is bigger. That said, this deck has ways to take advantage of discarding to hand size. If we have an expensive creature in hand, for example, maybe that gives us an extra reason to choose one pile over the other so that we can get enough cards into our hand and discard that creature during our cleanup step and reanimate it the next turn. This is even a way to get all the cards in both piles into our graveyard if that's where we want them. Discard in a graveyard deck is essentially a form of card selection, since nothing in our yard is gone for good, so we make our choices and keep our poker face as unreadable as Atris's mask. It's a strange feeling to play a virtual French vanilla commander, that is, a creature with only an enters trigger and a keyword, rather than something that gives us repeatable utility. But in this deck, the value Atris gives us is something we can repeat. He waits around while we drain our opponents, clone our threats, recur our monsters, and get trigger after trigger to keep our opponents guessing. He's able to sneak in evasively if we want to do a little more damage, but mostly he just bides his time, until the moment we need him to do another reading with another opponent, giving us a burst of cards in whichever zone or zones we care about most. Our plan is complex, our pieces moving constantly like the figures on the map in a field commander's tent. Our champions and challengers rise and fall with each turn's battles, only to rise again without warning. Our progress is something no one can predict, even with all the hints we give our pod. Which creatures should they fear more, the ones on our board or the ones in our bin? Which spell is worse for them to offer us face down, a removal effect or a value engine? They could just focus on their own game plan, but they know the stories of those who ignore an oracle's warnings, and between mistrust and misinterpretation, each of our turns leaves them knowing less than when they started. Nothing feels written when two half-truths don't make a lie. You'll enjoy this deck if you like knowing your command zone contains both a card advantage piece and a graveyard filler, or if you want to steeple your fingers and smile like a serpent as your opponents scrutinize their choices and seal their own fates. So, as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will see a considering section, filled with cards that I considered putting in the deck, but ultimately which, for me, did not make the cut. However, if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you like what I've done here and you want to do it sort of harder, or if you're interested in the way that Atris plays and you want to get ideas for taking him in a different direction, that considering section is a great place to begin when you build your own Atris Oracle of Half-Truths deck. So let's begin. We're going to start with our Recursion section. These are all cards that have ways to bring our creatures back from the graveyard to the battlefield, or to bring themselves back. Hopefully those cards went into the graveyard thanks to Atris, but of course they might have just died during combat, and that seems pretty good too. So the first card we're going to look at is, unusually, a removal spell. This is Black Sun's Twilight. X and a black for an instant that gives up to one target creature -X/-X until end of turn, so just a sweet removal spell. And if X is 5 or more, we get to return a creature card with mana value X or less from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So that tapped is not ideal for us, but we get to do this at instant speed, and that's pretty solid. Being able to pay 5 mana, or even these days 4 mana, for sort of an unconditional removal spell at sorcery speed is the going rate, which is a little expensive. So getting something back for 6 mana with X equals 5 and plus the black is a little expensive, but it's at instant speed, albeit getting them back tapped, and it comes with a removal effect that's a pretty solid one. It can even kill indestructible creatures. So yeah, Black Sun's Twilight is pretty nice. Next we have Ninja Teen from the recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set. This is a class enchantment, meaning when it first comes in, and it costs 2 and a black, it will have this text, and at sorcery speed, we can level it up to level 2 for 1 and a black, at which point it will have the text of both sections. Once it's level 2, again at sorcery speed, we can level it up to level 3, and then it has the text from all 3 sections. So the way it works is, when it first comes in, it says whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. Leaves the battlefield means it dies, it gets tucked back into our library, it gets bounced to our hand, it gets exiled, whatever it takes. Even if it's coming right back to the battlefield because it's been blinked, it's still left, so we drain everyone. That's pretty nice. Then at level 2, all of our creatures get +1/+0 and Menace. Now Atris already has Menace, but Atris isn't our best attacker, so being able to give everything a little bit of pump and some evasion is pretty great. Finally, level 3 is the cool one. It gives all of our creature cards in our graveyard Sneak for 3 and a black. Sneak is an iteration on Ninjutsu, but we're casting them from the graveyard, because we can cast creature spells from our graveyard using their Sneak abilities. The way that Sneak works is, we can only activate it during the Declare Blocker step. We can cast that spell, the creature spell that has Sneak, for 3 and a black, with the additional cost of returning an unblocked attacking creature that we control to our hand, or to its owner's hand, I should say. And then, if we do that, the creature we're casting with its Sneak cost will enter tapped and attacking. So, again, it's like Ninjutsu, but we can only do it during the declare blocker step, and it is casting that spell rather than activating an ability. But being able to recur creatures from our graveyard, this is reanimation, essentially, by sneaking creatures in, and by having our creatures that are probably evasive become unblocked. This is also a bounce effect, because it lets us take the creature that was attacking and was unblocked and put it back in our hand so that we can recast it and get its interest triggers again. Pretty great. This is especially nice if we do this with Atris, because then we can recast Atris and get Atris' interest trigger and do our little Oracle fun all over again. Next we have Victimize, one of my favorite reanimation spells. 2 and a black for a sorcery that says choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, then sacrifice a creature, and if you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. Notably, we have to have 2 creature cards in our graveyard in order to cast this at all, because it says target. So we cannot sacrifice a creature and then bring it and a different creature back, because we're choosing a creature to sacrifice after we've chosen the 2 targets that are going to be reanimated in Victimize. However, 3 mana, that's pretty great as a way to get 2 creatures back and put something in the graveyard that we can also reanimate again. No big deal. We also have a few ways of making tokens in this deck, so throwing away a token that we don't need in order to get 2 actual cards, that seems pretty good. Next we have Zoo Ifrit, Osteoharmonist. I think you're going to really think this card is cool, and if you do, that's great, because I have an entire commander deck I built out of her back in when Edge of Eternities was the main new set in Standard. So if you want to check that out, the link in the video is in the video's description. But what does she do? Zoo Ifrit is a 2/3 human wizard, a legendary human wizard, for 1 and double black. She only has 1 ability, which is tap her and return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and it is a skeleton in addition to its other types and has no abilities. We do this all only at sorcery speed. So it seems not great to be able to just get something back and it's vanilla. It's a skeleton. But we have big creatures. Big creatures are pretty powerful, just with their stats. In addition, Zoo Ifrit costs nothing other than tapping her. Tapping down a 2/3 to bring back like a 6/6, and do that every turn. Like we have the 6/6 come back, we block with it before our next turn, it goes to the graveyard again, next turn we just bring it right back with Zoo Ifrit. That's very, very strong. But not only that, this deck has blue in it. So what if we flicker that creature? It's gonna leave the battlefield and re-enter, and it won't have any of this effect on it anymore. It will no longer be a skeleton, it will regain its abilities, and it will be able to, because it's a new game object at this point, and so any kind of interest triggers we got will be great. Any kind of static effect that it has, we'll have that. Zoo Ifrit gives us the ability to get back a new creature every turn, as long as we've got one in our graveyard, at sorcery speed, and do whatever we need to with those creatures. Because since, again, all we have to do is tap her in order to get them back, we just do this every turn, and we've got the floor is a chump blocker that might have good stats. That's amazing. And then being able to have it in play and do whatever we need with it, whether it is use it and blink it, or bounce it to our hand and recast it if that's the only way we can get it back onto the battlefield, or even just sacrifice it to Victimize, or when any of our other spells that requires us to sacrifice a creature, then we can reanimate it with Zoo Ifrit again as soon as Zoo Ifrit's untapped, at sorcery speed, of course. So yeah, this is an ability that seems like it is powerfully nerfed, but it's really just powerful. Love Zoo Ifrit. Next we have Blood for Bones. This is a great card, 3 and a black for a sorcery that says, as an additional cost, sack a creature, and return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This does not target, so we can do this even if we only have 1 creature card in the graveyard, and we just want to bring it back to the battlefield. It does put another creature into our graveyard, but that's often pretty good for us. So a 4-mana Zombify that has an additional cost to return something, or to sacrifice something, and also lets us return something to our hand, is pretty great. Especially since, unlike Victimize, this calls for us to sacrifice a creature as an additional cost and does not target the creatures in the graveyard, which means the creature we sacrificed can be either the creature we reanimate, so this is almost like a blink effect, or the creature we put in our hand. So maybe we have a cheap creature in play, and an expensive one in the graveyard. We sack the cheap one, bring back the expensive one, and put the cheap one in our hand, and then recast it right away. And we've essentially just zombified, plus gotten the small creature to re-enter, and gotten triggers from that as well. Pretty great. Next we have Dread Return, a classic. This is 2 and double black for a sorcery with amazing Kev Walker art that says return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's good. It's a little more restrictively costed than Zombify, but it has flashback, sacrifice 3 creatures. So we can get 3 creatures in our graveyard and get the death triggers that we may have associated with them in order to get back a better creature. Maybe we're throwing away some tokens or copies, maybe we're throwing away some small creatures, or just getting a big creature in the graveyard that we want in the graveyard. We have at least one creature that we want to get into the graveyard and we don't want to leave. We just want it to stay there forever. Spoilers, it's Wonder, we'll get to it. But in any case, being able to flashback Dread Return gives us the ability to get more death triggers, get something else that we want back out more than those 3 if we've got that option, and flashback means if we somehow get Dread Return into our graveyard before we've cast it, for example, maybe we choose a face-down pile and the face-up pile had Dread Return in it, or vice versa, we still have access to the spell from our graveyard. Pretty nice. Next up is Terror of Tawashi from March of the Machine. This is 2 and double black for a 4/3 Phyrexian Ogre with Death Touch. 4 power creature with Death Touch is great. I'm going to say this now. I have often said Death Touch is a little bit like a pseudo evasion, because in Commander we have 40 life. So if someone attacks you with a Death Toucher, unless you have an indestructible blocker or some tokens that you don't care about dying or you actively want to die, you're going to look at your creatures and say, well, I spent mana to cast all of these, I don't want to lose them. I have so much life, I would rather just take the Death Touch damage. It's not Commander damage, so what does it matter? Which means that player, that blocking player, has chosen not to block simply because your creature had Death Touch. Because they know anything that they block with is going to die if it doesn't have Indestructible. So if there's not a way for them to trade, and even sometimes if there is a way for them to trade, they just don't want to because they want to keep their creature for other purposes. So this can be evasive on its own, which gives us the ability to Ninja Teen sneak something else in if we want to. But even better, Terror of Tawashi says when it attacks, it doesn't even have to hit. When it attacks, we can pay 3 and a black and return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and it's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So this is just Zombify, but make it a Phyrexian as part of its attack, so we get to do this repeatedly over and over. But what if it dies? Well, we can always reanimate this, but like I just said, it has Death Touch. So even though an opponent's going to take 10% of their starting life total when this does damage to them, it's likely, a lot of the time, they're not going to block it anyway, which just gives us a way to attack with it, zombify something, and attack with it again on the next turn since it didn't die in combat. Great. Vizier of Many Faces is next. This is 2 and double blue for a 0/0 Shapeshifter Cleric that says we may have it enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Doesn't even have to be one of ours, but a lot of times it will be. Except, if it was embalmed, the token has no mana cost, it's white, and it's a zombie in addition to its other types. And it has Embalm for 3 and double blue. Embalm is an ability that means we can pay its Embalm cost from the graveyard, and it will enter as a white 0-cost zombie in addition to its other types, but otherwise is the same thing that's printed, which is to say, a copy of a creature on the battlefield. And it just does the Embalm stuff to that token. We're actually not having it re-enter, I'm sorry, we're making a token copy of it in the process of exiling this. That's what Embalm does. We exile it from the graveyard, paying its Embalm cost, and make a token copy of it, but that copy is that token is a copy of a creature on the battlefield, but if it was embalmed, it's got no mana cost, it's white, and has a zombie, it's a zombie. So yeah, we got there. Vizier is basically just a clone that we can make a token clone of after it's already died. That's pretty good. It recurs itself, and it gives us the ability to get value out of duplicating our creatures or opponent's creatures. Both are good for us. Next up, we have Archpriest of Shadows. This is another March of the Machine card. It's great. It's 3 and double black for a 4/4 human warlock with backup 1. Backup means either when it enters, it gets a 1/1 counter, or we get to put a 1/1 counter on a different creature. And if we put it on a different creature, it gets the other abilities of Archpriest of Shadows until end of turn. So the Archpriest is a Death Toucher, so again, 4-power Death Toucher can be just something evasive, that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player or to a battle, we return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So straight up reanimate, or reanimation effect, based on combat damage. But it works on players and on battles. We're not running any battles in this deck, but I mean, maybe an opponent will be, and we're allowed to attack their battles. It gives them a lot more value, but it gives us value with the Archpriest. What's especially nice is if the Archpriest enters and we back something else up, well then it's going to have Death Touch, and it's going to reanimate things when it does combat damage to a player, whether or not we cast the Archpriest or reanimated the Archpriest pre-combat. It's going to enter, and backup's going to trigger either way. But if we choose to put the counter from backup on the Archpriest, then it's a 5/5 Death Touch. That's great. Yeah, love this card. Next up is Drana the Last Bloodchief. This is 3 and double black for a 4/4 legendary vampire cleric with flying that says whenever Drana attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. You return that card to the battlefield with an extra 1/1 counter on it, and it's a vampire in addition to its other types. So this is us not having the option to choose the creature we're returning, and it can't be legendary. But giving our opponents a little bit of, like, decision-making is similar to what we're doing with Atris, and so it puts our opponents in that same position. They have to decide what's the right choice here. If they have more than one choice, which creature do they want to give us, and how can we use that creature better? Most of our creatures have utility beyond just, being a big body. So what utility is going to work best with our board is something they'll have to ask themselves when they don't know our deck as well as we do, and also don't know what we have in hand or what we're going to get with Atris on the next time we get an Atris trigger from recasting him, from blinking him, whatever. I should also mention at this point that if Atris dies, it's a reanimation deck. We can just bring Atris back from the graveyard with one of our many effects. So next up is the Eldest Reborn, one of my favorite sagas. This is 4 and a black for a saga. If you haven't seen sagas before, this is an enchantment that says when it first comes in, and at the start of our first main phase on each of our turns, we put a lore counter on it, and we trigger whichever of these chapter abilities has the same number as the number of lore counters on it. And then once we've resolved the last trigger, we sacrifice this enchantment. So when it first comes in, it gets its first counter, and each opponent will sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. So it's good. At the start of our next first main phase, the first main phase on our next turn, we'll get another lore counter, and each opponent will discard a card. And then the first main phase on our next turn, it will get its third lore counter, and we get to put target creature or planeswalker from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. This can reanimate our stuff, but it says a graveyard. So it could be a creature that's in one of our opponent's graveyards, or a planeswalker, of course. Whether or not it's one that they sacrificed, or that they discarded, or got to their graveyard some other way. A lot of the times, it's worth it to get one of our own things, but just like what we've seen with our Visor and what we copy, the Eldest Reborn just wants us to get the best thing we can, so it's nice to have options. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering is next. This card is so cool. This is 4 and a black for a legendary sorcery. Legendary sorceries are only able to be cast if we control a legendary creature or a planeswalker. We have a few legendary creatures in this deck, but really what we're just trying to do is get out Atris as soon as we possibly can so we can get a little bit of advantage to our hand and our graveyard and get things rolling. So the chance that we're going to have our commander, who again is powerful but is not usually like a threat that our opponents need to remove, especially since we can reanimate him, means that we often have Atris in play whenever we get Yawgmoth's Vile Offering out, and we're able to use it. This is another reanimation and removal spell all in one. It says put up to one target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard, again, doesn't have to just be ours, onto the battlefield under our control, and we destroy up to one target creature or planeswalker. Then we exile Yawgmoth's Vile Offering. An incredible card, unbelievably beautiful chase stone art, and just a really cool moment in the history of Magic. Just Gerard, Urza, it's not really Hannah in the midst of Yawgmoth. Anyway, just very cool. In any case, Yawgmoth's Vile Offering, 5 mana reanimation spell that also just unconditionally destroys something that's a creature or planeswalker. Great. Next up, we have Garuda, Doom of Depths. This is just such a fun card. This is 4 and double Dimir hybrid mana. So you can cast this for 4 and double blue, 4 and double black, or 4 a blue and a black. This is a 6/6 legendary Demon Kraken with a companion ability. Companion is a cool effect, a cool mechanic, but we are not using it, so it's not relevant, so just ignore it. It says whenever Garuda enters, each player mills 4 cards, and then we put a creature card with an even mana value from among the milled cards onto the battlefield under our control. So sure, it's possible that this just says each player mills 4 cards, because we might end up with no graveyard, including our own, having any creatures in it with an even mana value. But we have plenty of even mana value creatures in our deck. Plus, it's not unlikely that we see something in an opponent's deck, like maybe a 2-mana Mana Dork, or a 4 mana of any sort. It doesn't matter. So yeah, Garuda puts cards in our graveyard, which is nothing for us anyway, and we maybe get to steal something from an opponent, or if not, just grab something of ours and reanimate it. Plus, Garuda's going to do that every time Garuda enters, so when we reanimate Garuda, or blink them, we get to have more fun. Nice. Next we have Metamorphosis Fanatic. This is a sweet card from Duskmourn Commander. It's 4 and double black for a 4/4 human cleric with lifelink that says when it enters, we return up to 1 target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it. So it just has lifelink. Pretty cool. But not only that, Metamorphosis Fanatic has Miracle for 1 and a black, meaning when we draw it, if it's the first card we've drawn this turn, we get to cast it immediately. So you have to kind of draw your cards carefully. There's a cool way of drawing cards that people who've played with Miracles do, because we want to be able to get Metamorphosis Fanatic into play for just 2 mana. As a 2-mana 4/4 lifelinker that reanimates a creature and gives it lifelink for as long as it's in play, that's very strong. But even if we don't get to Miracle this, and even if it dies, this interest trigger is still going to bring something back with it every time. So a lot of the time, if we have multiple creatures in our graveyard and one of them is Metamorphosis Fanatic, whenever we get one of our recursion effects to go off, we want to bring back the Fanatic, so it can also bring something else with it. Neat. Next we have a Room Enchantment from Duskmourn. Room Enchantments look like 2 cards because it's a split card where both sides are permanents. They're both an enchantment, and the way this works is both of these sides are called doors. When it's in our hand, we can cast either side, and that's the entirety of what's on the stack, basically. Then when it enters, that door that we cast is unlocked, and the other side is locked, which means at sorcery speed, we can pay its casting cost to unlock that side, and now the card has both names, a combined mana value, and the text of both sides on it. You can cast either side first, and then unlock the other one in play, whichever you like. It is just worth noting that if somehow you were to flicker a Room Enchantment, it will re-enter with both sides locked, just so you know. So, let's say you cast Polluted Cistern first. It is 1 and a black, for, of course, an enchantment, a room, that says whenever 1 or more cards are put into your graveyard from your library, each opponent loses 1 life for each card among those each type among those cards. So, for example, Metamorphosis Fanatic is a creature. That's 1 type. Do we have any cool, combinations? Well, we'll just say it like this. If you were to see a Sad Robot, for example, the Solemn Simulacrum, it's an artifact creature. So if it goes from your graveyard from your library to your graveyard, that's going to be every opponent losing 2 life, since that's 2 different card types. But I know you're thinking, but are we actually doing mill in this deck other than things like Garuda? Well, what you need to see is that Atris says that the target opponent looks at the top 3 cards of your library, puts them into piles, and we pick 1 pile and 1 goes to the graveyard. It does not say that these cards get exiled, which means, since it does not say that the cards, when they're being looked at and put into piles, are in a different zone than our library, they are still in the library zone. Which means our effect from Polluted Cistern, when one of those piles goes to our graveyard, it's going to our graveyard from our library. So our opponents are going to lose life for each card type among those cards. That means, notably, if we have 2 lands go to the graveyard, our opponents are each going to lose 1 life total, because that's the same type on both cards. It just counts all the types among the cards. But if we were to have, let's say, an enchantment and an artifact creature, that's a total of 3 types. If we had an enchantment creature and an artifact creature, that's only 3 types, since one's an enchantment, one's an artifact, and they're both creature. So yeah, we're just counting up card types among all the cards that go. But this is going to happen every time we have cards go to our graveyard from our library, which is all Atris does, besides putting cards in our hand, I guess. Anyway, Dim Oubliette is the other reason we have this card in the deck, which is 4 and a black. That says when we unlock this door, which either means we've unlocked it from the battlefield or it's entered and it's the one we cast, we then mill 3 cards and return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So we get to fill our graveyard a little bit, and we get to reanimate something. We are encouraged, by the way this functions, to do the Polluted Cistern first, because not only is it faster for us to get out than our commander, so it's likely for us to, if we have it in hand before we cast our commander, get to our commander after it's in play, and thereby get the value from the cistern when our commander has its enters trigger. But also, if Polluted Cistern is already unlocked when we unlock Dim Oubliette, it's going to see us mill these 3 cards. We're going to mill those cards and then return a creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield, and then this trigger will go on the stack, and we will get each opponent to lose a life for each card type among the cards that we milled of those 3, including the creature we put back into play, because that creature did go from our graveyard to our library, whether or not it stayed in our graveyard. So yeah, pretty nice little combination here. I really like this card. Finally, we have Virtue of Persistence from Wilds of Eldraine. This is 5 and double black for an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's an expensive enchantment, and you have to wait till your upkeep for it to do anything, but it can reanimate cards out of your opponent's graveyards or any card we may need from our graveyard. Love it. But it also has an adventure. If you haven't seen adventures before, the way this works is this is just an enchantment called Virtue of Persistence that costs 5 and double black. But built onto the card is a sorcery called Locthwain's Scorn that costs 1 and a black. That spell gives target creature -3/-3 until end of turn and gains us 2 life. And if we cast an adventure, rather than this card going to the graveyard like it normally would when you resolve a sorcery, it instead goes to exile, and we are allowed to cast the permanent half of it, Virtue of Persistence, from exile whenever we have the mana for it, at the normal timing rules. So we don't even have to wait till another turn, the way we might with a plot spell or something. Plot? Is that what I want to refer to? Maybe. Anyway, it's just worth noting, you can't cast the enchantment and then cast Locthwain's Scorn while Virtue of Persistence is in play. The only way it could go is you have to go on the adventure first, and once you have, it'll go to exile and you have access to Virtue of Persistence afterwards. So yeah, either enchantment only, or sorcery then enchantment. That's how it works. So that covers our recursion section. But how do we get cards into our graveyard besides our commander? Well, we have a few cards that can put cards in our graveyard. We're going to start with Bitter Triumph, and we are using the new Secrets of Strixhaven Mystical Archive printing because I love the Mystical Archive. I say new because at recording the time of this video, it's the most recent set out. So yeah, this is an instant for 1 and a black that says, as an additional cost, discard a card or pay 3 life. Discard a card lets us get a creature, or whatever else we want, into our graveyard so that we can reanimate it later without us having to worry about somehow contriving a way to get it back on our library and mill it, or have to spend its maybe expensive cost and then let it die and then bring it back, whatever it may be. So getting into our graveyard so that we can reanimate is an important part of how the deck works. Bitter Triumph lets us do that as the additional cost. And if we don't have something we want to discard, we can just pay the 3 life. And what we get is we destroy target creature or planeswalker. So this is Heroic Downfall, Hero's Downfall, for 1 black less and 3 life instead. So it's sort of like expensive Phyrexian mana, and if we don't want to pay that, we just discard a card, which is good for us. This is great. Next we have Gossip's Talent. This is another class enchantment. This one's from Bloomburrow. It's 1 and a blue, with level 1 being whenever a creature we control enters, Surveil 1. Surveil 1 is great for us. It lets us change what we're doing with the top of our library, because if we have Atris triggering, or we know Atris is going to trigger soon because we're going to recast him or blink him or whatever, then we want to know that on top of our library there are good cards that our opponent can put into piles so that we can see. In addition, we care about getting creatures or other cards into our graveyard. Surveil lets us do either one. We look at the top card, If it's going to be on top, we want to keep it on top. If we want it in our graveyard, we can just surveil it to the graveyard. Perfect. And this happens every time we have a creature enter. This is an alliance trigger or a creature fall trigger, whatever you want to think of it as. That means creatures entering when we cast them, when we reanimate them, when we blink them, whatever. This is great. I will say, if you play Gossip's Talent on Magic Arena, this card is annoying because playing it in like a blink deck means you're getting constant surveil triggers, and if you want the thing on top, you're going to have to go through all of them. But at least people let you shortcut a little bit in paper. So once it's in play at sorcery speed, we can level it up to level 2 for 1 and a blue, giving it the ability to say whenever we attack, target attacking creature with power 3 or less can't be blocked this turn. I mean, power 3 or less is not very much power, but do you know what has power 3 or less? Atris. Which means tossing Atris at our opponent as a free attack is pretty good, since we're not usually blocking with Atris, since we don't want to have to recast him, unless we have a reanimation spell that'll let us bring him back and get his interest trigger again, or like a blink spell or a bounce effect that would do the same thing. But in any case, being able to, if we're not going to block with him, throw in an extra 3 damage every turn, that seems okay. Especially if we can level Gossip's Talent up to level 3, which is for 3 and a blue. Whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we may exile it and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is, much like Ninja Teen, a very powerful level 3. Imagine this is Atris. We attack with Atris. Atris is unblockable. Atris does combat damage. We blink it. It'll come back into play, get its interest trigger again, and we get all that value. But it also doesn't say it has to be the creature that we chose with power 3 or less that's unblockable. Whenever any of our creatures does combat damage to a player, we can flicker it. At the very least, that is virtual vigilance. The creature doing the damage, and if it was tapped, we exile it and it comes back in, and now it's untapped. The only creatures we wouldn't do this with are our token creatures. Plus, we have so many creatures that have great interest triggers. At the very least, we get those triggers again. I guess that's not the very least. The very least is that it comes back in untapped. But yeah, it's very powerful. It's an investment of 8 mana, but we can do it over the course of multiple turns. Whenever we have a little extra mana, or then 4 to spare, yeah, Gossip's Talent can really help us out. Next up, we've seen Victimize. Victimize lets us put a creature in the graveyard by sacrificing it. Same is true for Blood for Bones, and Dread Return by sacrificing 3 creatures when we flash it back. We have not seen Sir Conrad. This is Sir Conrad the Grim, 3 and double black for a 5/4 legendary human knight that says, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever you meet one of these 3 conditions. Whether another creature dies, doesn't say non-token, and it doesn't say a creature you control either. So this is a Blood Artist. Anytime a creature dies, any creature of any kind, Sir Conrad will deal damage to an opponent. Sir Conrad will do that damage if a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield as well. So anytime a creature gets milled, whether it's from Atris or some other effect, whether a creature gets discarded, maybe one of ours or another opponent's, doesn't matter what it is. If we have Garuda come in and we mill everyone and everyone's getting cards into the graveyard from that, Sir Conrad's going to trigger anytime any creature is put into any graveyard from somewhere other than the battlefield or from the battlefield, because that's what dying is. Finally, if a creature card leaves our graveyard, this is the only clause that cares about whose graveyard and whose creature is concerned. If that happens, or if creatures go from anywhere to the graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is relevant because this is damage. It's not, even though I've got it in the Drain section later, which you'll see, it's just because it's similar to Drain. But if we were to have, for example, the Metamorphosis Fanatic bring Sir Conrad back from the graveyard with a lifelink counter on, Sir Conrad will have lifelink, and so when he does damage to each opponent, we're going to gain life for each damage that he does. And he's going to do a lot of damage over the course of this game, especially in this deck. And all of that is powerful, but the reason Sir Conrad is in this section is because we can pay 1 and a black and make each player mill a card. That includes us, so that can help us and mess with our opponents, and hopefully, when those cards get milled, if any of them are creature cards, Sir Conrad's second clause is going to trigger, and he's going to do a damage to each opponent. Yeah, notably, the creature dying, or the creature going to the graveyard, or our creature leaving the graveyard, it doesn't matter whose creatures those are, every opponent's going to take damage. Sweet. And then we've got Sir Conrad Jr., even though it costs a little bit more. This is a Dreadhound. This is a 6/6 demon dog for 4 and double black that says when it enters, we mill 3 cards. So solid way to put cards in our graveyard, and to trigger Sir Conrad and itself, because it says whenever a creature dies or a creature is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. So this doesn't work in the same way that Sir Conrad does, in that it does not do damage, and it doesn't trigger when creatures leave our graveyard or when creatures are put into graveyards from anywhere other than the battlefield or library. So discard won't trigger the Dreadhound. However, it's got a bigger body, it comes with a free mill 3, and it's half of Sir Conrad, which is already very strong. So yeah. We've seen Garuda. Garuda has everyone mill 4 when Garuda comes in, and the dim oubliette side of this room has us mill 3 when we unlock it before we return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. So that covers our graveyard cards, the cards that will put cards in our graveyard. But what do we want to do with them once they are in play? Well, we have a blink section for that. These are all cards that let us flicker our creatures, which is to say, to exile them and return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. Or maybe sometimes until our control. We'll see. So Hide on the Ceiling is a Spider-Man card that comes first. X and a blue for an instant that exiles X target artifacts and or creatures, so we can hit artifacts with this, and return the exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, which means this is what I call a slow flicker. Rather than those cards coming back into play that same turn as part of the same resolution, it creates a delayed trigger that brings them back at the start of the next end step. And since this is instant speed, we can use this on opponents' turns or during combat or whatever we may need. If we want to save a creature during combat, if we want to save a creature from a board wipe that happens on an opponent's turn. Normal blink effects can't do that because they bring the creature back in right away. That would save a creature from dying in combat, but it wouldn't save them from a board wipe because it would just resolve, the creature would come back in, and then the board wipe would resolve anyway. But Hide on the Ceiling flickers these creatures slowly. The slow flicker means they come back at the end step, so the creatures all leave the battlefield, creatures or artifacts, of course. Then at the next end step, they come back after the resolution of whatever effect we were trying to protect them from. So this is a great way to protect our creatures and our artifacts. We can also hit our opponent's stuff with this if we want to do a little bit of politicking, or if there's something in play that's really helping us out a lot. If someone has a removal spell, or again, a sweeper, that would destroy something of an opponent's, either we can choose to just flicker it with their stuff, and because maybe it helps us, or we flicker it, I'll continue this example, or we say to them, hey, I know you don't want to have to recast your 7-mana commander. I'll tell you what, if you leave me alone for a turn cycle or two, I will protect your commander from this board wipe. And they might say, oh goodness, please, yes, I will of course agree with that. And then we've made a friend, we've helped them out, and hurt our opponents because they probably don't want that 7-mana commander in play anyway. But we can also use this as a cool removal spell, at least in a short time. Hide on the Ceiling lets us exile creatures and artifacts, and they don't have to be ours. So if there's a problematic artifact and or creatures that we don't want in play, at least for a turn, we can get rid of them for now. We can say, hey, we've got enough mana to target all of your blockers, let's get rid of them, and now our stuff is unblockable during this turn. Or maybe we do this during opponent A's turn, and we exile all the artifacts and or creatures that could stop opponent A from attacking opponent B. We're exiling opponent B's creatures. We do this maybe as a sweet way of like politicking with opponent A. Say, hey, you help us out a little bit, and we'll make it so your next attack is not able to be blocked. Or we just do this if we're like, wow, opponent A is attacking opponent B, and if opponent B couldn't block, opponent B is gone. We just cast Hide on the Ceiling, exile opponent B's blockers, and now we've used our opponent's attack phase and their creatures and one of our spells to kill opponent B. Extremely strong and flexible, this card, even if all we're doing with it is paying 1 and a blue to flicker Atris and get his enters trigger again. Very cool. Next we have Nephalia Smuggler. This card sees very little play, I have found, but it's just very strong in its flexibility and its repeatability, even though it's a little expensive. A single blue gets us a 1/1 human rogue that for 3 and a blue and tap, we can exile another target creature we control and return it to the battlefield under our control. So this is just a straight up blink effect. It's pretty good, but it also says return it to the battlefield under your control. So this can be a permanent theft effect. If we had some way to steal an opponent's creature, maybe Virtue of Persistence or any of our other effects that let us reanimate something from an opponent's graveyard, if we had anything that wasn't just making that under our control already, we can use Nephalia Smuggler to flicker it before it goes back to our opponent, and it stays under our control. It gets rid of any kind of temporary control effect. So yeah, in addition to that, if we've just got mana lying around, which sometimes we do in this deck, 4 mana to get an extra effect that we can activate at instant speed, it's pretty great. We've seen Gossip's Talent. It lets us flicker whatever does combat damage to an opponent if we wish to, once it's at level 3. Planar Incision is next. This is 1 and a blue for an instant that exiles, again, an artifact or creature, and then returns it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Interestingly, the way this is worded, it puts a 1/1 counter on an artifact, even if that artifact was not a creature. So yeah, just a nice way to get a little counter, doesn't matter, but really just helps us protect our stuff since it's instant speed, but also to flicker them so we can get our enters triggers again. Yeah, pretty good. One of my favorites. Next, we have Conjurer's Closet, because we want blink effects that will repeat themselves. This is 5 generic mana for an artifact that, at the beginning of our end step, we can exile a creature we control and return it to the battlefield under our control. So a free blink at every one of our end steps, that seems pretty good. Deadeye Navigator is next. I love this card. This is 4 and double blue for a 5/5 spirit with Soul Bond. Soul Bond is an ability that says, when this enters or any other creature enters, we may pair Deadeye Navigator with another creature, whether it's any creature that's already in play, if we're triggering when this enters, or any creature that is entering once Deadeye Navigator is already in play. Then, once we've paired those creatures, they're going to stay paired until one of them leaves the battlefield, or both, obviously. And as long as Deadeye Navigator is paired with another creature, both it and that other creature, each of those creatures, has pay 1 and a blue and blink this creature. Exile it and return it to the battlefield under your control. Again, it says your control, not its owner's control, so just like Nephalia Smuggler, if we've got some way that we've taken a temporary control of an opponent's creature, now it's not a temporary control anymore. We just have it. It's under our control as long as it's in play. So Deadeye Navigator is great because we can activate its own ability and blink it and pair it with something else, and then activate that ability that's now on the new creature it's paired with, flickering it, and we're all set. When that creature flickers, it has left the battlefield, which means it's no longer paired, and it will re-enter, which means we may pair it right away if we want to. Or we don't have to. We can just hang on to the Deadeye Navigator, wait until something else has come in that we want to pair with it, or whenever we want. I guess we can't activate the Deadeye Navigator when it's not paired, but yeah, being able to move it around by flickering it or flickering the creatures that are coming in whenever we reanimate them, whenever we flicker them another way, or just cast them. Lots to do here, and lots of ways to repeatedly get our triggers, especially if we're just using it for Atris. Finally, we have Y'shtola Rule. I am not a Final Fantasy person, so forgive me if I've mispronounced this cat creature. She is a cat druid, a 3/5 for 4 and double blue, that does something really cool for us. Y'shtola says at the beginning of our end step, we exile a creature we control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So we're not doing the permanent steal thing, but we are getting a free flicker at our end step the same way Conjurer's Closet lets us. So why are we paying 1 extra mana in more restrictive casting colors than Conjurer's Closet for a creature that could just die? Because Y'shtola, as part of that same effect, that same ability, says, then if it's the first end step of the turn, there is an additional end step after this step. Meaning, Y'shtola will trigger at our end step, and we get to flicker something. And then, the rest of this resolves, we pass our end step, and we get a second end step. So Y'shtola will flicker something else. So Y'shtola, for 1 extra mana than the Conjurer's Closet, does the flicker thing twice, and we don't even have to choose the targets at the same time, because it's going to happen during our first end step, and then during our second end step. Meaning if we have Y'shtola in play and Conjurer's Closet, at the end step, Conjurer's Closet will flicker something, and so will Y'shtola. We'll go to our second end step, and they'll both flicker something else again. Very good. So, that covers our blink section. We also can rebuy things in our deck with our bounce section. Not very much of it, but all of it's repeatable. We've already seen Ninja Teen and how it lets us use this sneak ability to bounce our creatures that are attacking and unblocked. in order to cast a creature from our graveyard with Sneak. That's a pretty cool thing we can do by taking the creature we had attacking, putting it back in our hand. We can then recast it and get its effects again. It's more expensive to rebuy something, obviously, than it is to blink it, but it does protect our creature as well by putting it in our hand. Next, we have Alora, Merry Thief. This is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 legendary halfling rogue that says whenever you attack, up to one target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. So then we return that creature to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So if we make something unblockable, we will have to bounce it. But the other way to look at it is we get to make something unblockable and then we get to bounce it so that we can, during the next turn, cast it again. This ability of Alora is essentially our other talent. What's our talent card called? There it is, Gossip's Talent. It's essentially the two halves of Gossip's Talent, but it doesn't require that creature to be power 3 or less to make it unblockable, and just means we get to flicker it, but rather than flickering it, what we're doing is we are bouncing it to our hand. So yeah, it's not quite the same thing. Oh goodness, I can't spell words today. Alora is not exactly the same thing as the Gossip's Talent, but being able to make something unblockable, maybe something that's huge of ours, and then bounce it to our hand so that we can recast it the next turn, all of that's very strong. Alora also has Choose a Background, but that's not relevant in our deck, even though we do have one background in this deck. So yeah. Next up we have Crystal Shard, a classic. 3 generic mana for an artifact that says if we pay 3 and tap it, or if we pay a blue and tap it, we can pay the cost either way, we return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1 generic. So this is a solid removal spell, or removal effect, that we can repeat over and over if we wish to. As long as that opponent is not willing to pay the 1, or if they're just tapped out, they don't have the ability to pay the 1, so we can just spend a single blue, tap it, and get a nice unsummon. It seems restrictive, like they have to pay the 1, but we do have the ability to cast or to activate this for a blue or for 3, so it kind of works itself out. Except that we're not using Crystal Shard typically on our opponent's stuff. It's just nice that we have the option to. Usually what we want is Crystal Shard says, pay a blue and tap this, bounce one of your own creatures. Do it at instant speed. Because it says return it to its owner's hand unless its controller pays a generic, we just choose not to pay that generic. And so we're just getting a repeated unsummon of one of our creatures every turn. And if we don't have blue lying around, we might have some colorless and or black mana we can activate it with in addition. So yeah, a constant way to protect our creatures from a board wipe, to bounce them after they've blocked a non-trampling attacker so we don't take damage from that attacker, but we also don't lose our creature permanently, or just to put it back in our hand so that we can recast it, maybe even that same turn. Crystal Shard does a lot for us. Next we have Grazilax, Illithid Scholar, originally from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. This is 1 double blue for a 3/2 legendary horror that says whenever a creature we control becomes blocked, we may return it to its owner's hand. So we protect our creatures that are attacking, so we might as well attack with them, because it doesn't say whenever one or more creatures, you may return one of them. It's just any one of our creatures that gets blocked triggers Grazilax and lets us bounce it if we wish to. Now, bouncing it does mean we have to recast it, so it's not like this is a free Mazavith effect where we just remove it from combat. But it does protect our creatures and thereby give us the ability to attack with a little more impunity, especially if it looks like our opponent might not block, because it means if they do block, we can either let the block happen and maybe trade creatures or just do damage to their creature or whatever, or we use Grazilax's trigger to bounce our creature if we just don't want our creature to stick around and go through combat. But it may be that our opponent chooses not to block because they know if they do block, we're just going to bounce our creature, and we're going to get more value out of it, and they want to deny us that value, so they just take the damage. Much like I was talking about with Death Touch, this effect can be a kind of pseudo-evasion, although it's based on your opponent's decisions, just like Death Touch is, which feeds into the flavor of the deck, with our opponents having less information than us and being forced to make decisions based on our stuff. And Grazilax says whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So this is not Coastal Piracy, because it's one or more creatures. So if we have 3 of our creatures do combat damage to a player, then we just draw 1 card. But it does say a player. So if it's a situation where we can attack multiple players with different creatures, each one of those opponents that takes damage from our creatures in combat is going to trigger Grazilax. So we'll get to draw a card for each opponent that takes that damage. So yeah, pretty good. We've seen Ninja Teen. We haven't seen Hullbreaker Horror. Card I truly love and hate. I love playing with it, hate playing against it. I've definitely, in Commander, like it was a 5-player Commander game, I think, played a Hullbreaker Horror and it took over the whole game. It's ridiculous. This is 5 in double blue for a 7/8 Kraken Horror with Flash that cannot be countered. So already expensive for a big body that it's gonna land, and we can play it whenever we want to. And it says whenever we cast a spell, we can choose to either return target spell we don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This first ability means we have to not control it, but it's a spell. A spell is a card on the stack. So that means this is not a counter spell, but it's like a remand, kind of. If we have an instant spell we can cast, or something we can flash in, Hullbreaker Horror lets us have its effect put someone's spell back in their hand. So they have to recast it in order to get their value out of it, or just wait till next turn to be able to do so because maybe they don't have the mana for it anymore. But more frequently, Hullbreaker Horror is just whenever we cast a spell, we get to bounce something. Oftentimes, that's going to be an opponent's something, because again, they're going to have to recast it if they want it back. And it gives us, therefore, the ability to have fewer blockers, to have less things that our opponents have in play that we have to worry about, especially things that they can only cast at sorcery speed, like maybe we don't want their Panharmonicon to go off. Maybe we're scared of their Door to Nothingness. Or maybe we just don't like them having Doubling Season in play. But of course, we can hit creatures as well, and thereby use this as a form of evasion, or removal, I suppose. But it does not say, on its second option, like it does in the first one, something that we don't control. We can bounce our own things with Hullbreaker Horror, thereby giving us the ability to protect our stuff if we're casting something and triggering the horror at instant speed, but also just to maybe bounce Atris and put him back in our hand, recast him, probably that same turn, and get his trigger again. Yeah, very good. Plus a huge body, we might as well. So that covers our bounce section. We've got one more section that kind of plays most heavily into our game plan, and that is our clones section. These are cards that give us more triggers of our creatures, enters triggers, all of our other triggers that care about our stuff leaving the battlefield, and most of all, giving us more stuff in play, even if it is a temporary thing. So we've already seen Visor of Many Faces. This is our only actual clone creature in the deck. It'll enter as something that's already in play, whether we control it or not. And if we embalm it, the token will do the same thing, but with the embalm sort of riders. We are running Blade of Selves. This is 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 4, so a lot more expensive than I like to pay for equipment, but it gives the equipped creature Myriad. Myriad means when that creature attacks, we make a token copy of it for every opponent other than the opponent we're attacking, and each of those copies is attacking a different opponent. So if we have 3 opponents and we attack opponent A with the creature equipped with Blade of Selves, we get a copy of that creature that we're attacking with that's going at opponent B or one of their planeswalkers, and another that's going at opponent C or one of their planeswalkers. And then at the end of combat, we exile those tokens. So this is awesome to put on Atris, because the tokens come in and they are not non-legendary. So if we do this on a legendary creature, we're going to have to legend rule away all but one of those creatures right away. And since the Myriad tokens do disappear at the end of combat, we probably want to keep the original, and we probably would have done that anyway. But that doesn't mean that those creatures aren't dying when we put them in the graveyard to the legend rule, and it also doesn't mean they didn't enter. So if we were to use this with Atris, those 2 Atris copies that we get will go away as soon as we legend rule them, but they will have entered, so we get the Atris enters trigger for both of them. And so we get to do that process twice, maybe with 2 different opponents if we want. But by doing this with a creature that is not legendary, we get even more value, because those creatures are not just going to have their enters triggers and whatever other triggers we have for creatures entering, like Gossip's Talent, but also we have free attacking tokens. They don't get to last beyond combat, but they do last during combat, and they can certainly do damage, trade with opponent's creatures. If they do damage in combat to an opponent, Grazilax triggers and we draw a card. yeah, Blade of Selves can give us a lot of nice repeatable value. It does have a little bit of an anti-synergy with the fact that we might be flickering our stuff, because then we have to re-equip it. But in a way, that's not that much of an anti-synergy, because the flip side is Blade of Selves stays around, as opposed to being like an aura, which if we were to flicker something or bounce it or just have it die so we can reanimate it, then the aura wouldn't stay on the battlefield. But Blade of Selves does, giving us the ability to re-equip it to either that same creature when it comes back or a different creature that we might get more value from. Next up is Quasi-Duplicate. This is 1 and double blue for a sorcery that just makes a token that's a copy of a creature we control. So again, we can use this on something that's legendary if we don't care about legend ruling it away. So we probably don't want to do that on something like Y'shtola, since Y'shtola doesn't do anything for us just on enters. But we could do it on Atris to get an extra Atris trigger if Atris is in play and we just have this 3 mana lying around that we can use it for. But Quasi-Duplicate also has Jumpstart, which is sort of a variation of Flashback. We can cast it from our graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs, and then we exile this card. So that means, I didn't put this in this section, but it requires us to discard a card. That's a graveyard effect. That lets us maybe put a creature into our graveyard as part of casting Quasi-Duplicate. That's pretty sweet. We don't get to cast Quasi-Duplicate again after we do that because it exiles, just like with Flashback. But being able to cast this again by putting something in our graveyard and then getting another token that we care about, yeah, seems great. My greatest creation, me. Love this card. Next we have Rite of Replication. This is 2 and double blue for a sorcery that says make a token that's a copy of target creature, and if the spell was kicked, instead create 5 of those tokens, and it has kicker for 5 generic mana. So either it's 2 and double blue to make a token copy of a creature, and it does not say creature we control. So that's where that other generic mana is coming in from Quasi-Duplicate, which is 1 and double blue for a creature we control. Rite of Replication is 2 and double blue, but it can be a creature we don't control if we want. Or we pay a total of 7 and double blue if we kick it, and we get 5 tokens of that same creature. It's got to be the one creature. So again, we're not really getting a lot of our value out of this if we kick it and we hit a legendary creature, unless that legendary creature is giving us a lot when it first comes in, or if we have ways to get value out of our creatures dying, which we'll see more of in our drain section. Finally, we have Season of Weaving. This is one of our 2 Wraths in the deck, technically, but it does a lot of really cool stuff for us. This is 4 and double blue for a sorcery that lets us choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes, and we can choose the same mode more than once. So it basically gives us this weird resource of paw prints. We get 5 of them, and we can split them up however we wish in these effects. So we can, if we want, just draw 5 cards. Just spend all our 5 paw prints to get 5 cards. We can also spend 2 paw prints and make a copy of an artifact or creature we control. So if we make a copy of one of our, let's say Soul Ring, we could do that twice if we wanted to, spend 2 paw prints to do it once and then 2 again, and then we get to draw a card as well for our total of 5. But usually we're using this to make copies of our creatures. Even if it's just 1 copy of a creature, and then maybe drawing 3 cards. That's pretty good. So making a token, it again is not non-legendary, but we still get its effects when it comes in and when it dies to the legend rule. And if the creature we're targeting is already not legendary, then we get to keep it and it hangs around. That's pretty solid. Its third ability is for 3 paw prints, we return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. So this is a mass bounce effect. It's everything that isn't a land or a token goes away, which is sweet because we could have made a token that copies one of our artifacts or creatures with its second ability. So we could pay 2 here, make a token of something, and then pay 3 here and bounce everything except for lands and tokens, which includes the token we just made. Why this is especially cool is we choose all of our modes and they resolve all together in this order as part of the resolution of the spell. The reason that's notable is because we can make a copy of a creature or 2 creatures that are different, that are both legendary if we wish to, and we won't lose them until state-based actions are checked, which does not happen in the middle of the resolution of a spell. So for example, if we want, we can choose the 2 and 3 paw print modes. We choose to make a copy of Atris, and we choose to bounce everything that isn't a land and a token. Meaning, we'll make a copy of Atris, and we will bounce the original Atris to our hand. Only then are state-based actions checked, which means it doesn't matter that we had 2 copies of a legendary creature in play at the same time, because that only matters as part of state-based actions checking. All that matters is when they check, which is after the resolution of Season of Weaving, we only have 1 creature that's legendary that has a unique name in play. And we do, the copy. So yeah, we can have some pretty sweet fun with this if we want to. If we had like a legendary artifact as well, like, some legendary artifact, we could do that with the artifact instead, or one of our other legendary creatures if we just don't want an extra Atris. But a lot of the times we do, because this puts a lot of things back in our hand. Meaning at the end step, we're likely to go to our cleanup step and have to discard things, so that next turn we can reanimate them. So being able to make a copy of something and bounce the original puts one more thing in our hand that either we can discard at our end step, or that forces us to discard something else at our end step. So yeah, bouncing Atris and making a copy of him isn't just great because if we're doing the board wipe thing, putting the original Atris in our hand again lets us recast him. It edges out something else in our hand that we would have to discard during our end step, and gets his trigger after the rest of this resolution is done, because that token did enter the battlefield, so we get another Atris trigger, and we get to put more things in our hand and graveyard, which means even more things during our cleanup step. So Season of Weaving can do a lot for us, and it's, even though I've talked about these second and third modes a lot, the first mode is not anything to sneeze at. Sometimes we don't need the board wipe, we just want a copy or 2 of something, and we want to get 1 or 3 cards with that. Not terrible. And that covers all of the several sections that I consider to be sort of the big moving parts of our game plan. Oh hey, do you maybe want to like the video? I mean, only if you want to. Yeah, nice, thanks. I'm just kidding, you don't have to like it if you don't want to. I'm grateful for you watching anyway. Thank you for being here. Anyway, let's get to the parts of our deck that support our game plan, starting with our card advantage section, which as usual I have tagged as draw. It doesn't mean all these cards do the draw a card action, they just give us access to more cards in the form of card advantage, so there you go. But the Baleful Strix does draw us a card. This is a blue and a black for a 1/1 artifact creature, bird. It has flying, it has death touch, and when it enters we draw a card. I love this card. This card is so cool. It's a great blocker, it's got death touch, and it flies. It's a great attacker, it flies, giving us a way to sneak things in from the graveyard using Ninja Teen. And if we flicker it, if we bounce it and replay it, or if we reanimate it, it draws us a card every time. Love the Strix. Next we have Satoru the Infiltrator, a blue and a black for a 2/3 legendary human rogue ninja, or human ninja rogue rather, with menace, and whenever Satoru and or 1 or more other non-token creatures we control enter, if none of them were cast or no mana was spent to cast them, we draw a card. So if we reanimate Satoru, comes in, and we didn't spend any mana to cast him, then, and he wasn't cast, so we draw a card. If we reanimate something else, if we flicker something, and it blinks back in and we get to draw a card, whether it's a slow flicker or not, we'll draw a card whenever 1 or more of those creatures enter. So yeah, Satoru can give us repeated card draw by us doing the things that we are going to be spending our time in this deck doing anyway. Candlekeep Sage is next. This is 2 and a blue for a legendary enchantment background. This is the other background I mentioned. That says commander creatures you own have, when this creature enters or leaves the battlefield, draw a card. So that means only the actual Atris that we have. If we make a copy of Atris, even one that doesn't immediately get legend ruled away, it is not our commander. Our commander is the designation of that actual piece of cardboard Atris. So only when Atris enters or leaves do we draw a card from this trigger, but that's going to be a lot in this deck. Grazalax Illithid Scholar is next. This is 1 and double blue for a 3/2 legendary horror, originally from AFR, that says whenever a creature we control becomes blocked, we may return it to its owner's hand. So that's pretty solid. It's a little bit like our Gossip's Talent class. It's not quite the same because it doesn't flicker, but it gives us the ability to attack with impunity. We attack with our creatures, and maybe our opponent says, well, you know, I'm going to block you, and if they do, we just bounce our creature to our hand. We don't have to lose them permanently or have them go to the graveyard if we don't want to. Maybe our opponent says, I'm going to block, and then we don't want to do that because it's a good block, and we're willing to do that damage or even trade our creature away. It goes to the graveyard, we can always reanimate it. But it could also be that our opponent says, oh, you're just going to bounce the creature if I block with it? Well, then I don't block. And we say, okay. Because they don't want us to get the ability to rebuy our creature's enters triggers. So instead, they just take damage. So either way, Grazilax helps us. And whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So every time we have any number of creatures do damage to a player, that's great. Combat damage, of course. And so if we attack with multiple creatures in multiple different directions, like maybe with our Blade of Selves, we might hit multiple players, and if we hit multiple players, this will trigger multiple times because it triggers on a player, no matter how many creatures hit one player. Sweet. Next, we have our Midnight Clock. This is really more of a ramp piece, but it's nice in our deck. It's 2 and a blue for an artifact that if we tap it, we can make a blue mana, and we can pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on it. Hour counters are not a counter with an inherent mechanical meaning, they're just used by the clock. It says at the beginning of each upkeep, we put an hour counter on it, and that's each upkeep, so on our opponent's upkeeps as well. So each turn cycle, it's going to end up with 4 more counters on it if we didn't put even more than that. And when the 12th hour counter is put on it, midnight strikes. It strikes midnight. We shuffle our hand and graveyard into our library, then draw a 7 and exile this artifact. So you might say that this is a little bit anti-synergistic with our deck because it does shuffle our graveyard away and we care about our graveyard. But being able to get a fresh 7 is often very powerful, and we have ways to get things back in our graveyard. It's not a big deal. So this also lets us put back into our library, and maybe even our hand, cards that we might have milled or otherwise put into our graveyard with our Atris triggers that we couldn't get back, like lands and stuff. So Midnight Clock is a nice manalith that only taps for blue and gives us the ability to wheel eventually. It's a fine card if you want to replace this with something else as a different kind of acceleration piece, but I like it in this deck, and I just like it in general, so yeah. Next up, we have Hostage Taker. Hostage Taker is terrific. This is really more of a removal spell, but it also gives us access to an opponent's creature. This is 2, a blue and a black, for a 2/3 human pirate that says when it enters, we exile another creature or artifact until this creature leaves the battlefield, and we may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. Sweet. So if we get rid of an opponent's creature, maybe it's their commander, maybe they just put it back in the command zone, no big deal. We've got our 2/3 Hostage Taker hanging out, and they've got to recast their commander. But if we steal their Galta or their Panharmonicon, because we can hit artifacts with it, whatever it may be, they don't get it back unless they remove our Hostage Taker before we cast their spell, because we can just cast it, and once it's cast, it's no longer in exile, so it's changed zone, so it's a different game object, so it doesn't matter. If they get rid of the Hostage Taker, we get to keep whatever we cast. That's pretty great, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it, so it fixes our mana perfectly. Very strong card, in addition to the fact that we can bounce this, flicker this, bounce and recast, flicker, reanimate this, and do it all over again. Great. Next we have Solemn Simulacrum. Love the sad robot. Pay 4 generic to get a 2/2 artifact creature golem that when it enters, we Rampant Growth. We may Rampant Growth. We search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Good acceleration, and when it dies, we draw a card. So it's not my favorite thing to reanimate with our reanimate effects, especially if those reanimate effects are not repeatable ones. But attacking or blocking with the sad robot means it either does damage, stops damage, and or draws a card. We bring it back, we get another Rampant Growth effect. And ramp in our blue-black deck is something we want all the time. Maybe we flicker this, get the ramp effect again. Maybe we bounce it and recast it. Whatever we need to do, the sad robot is giving us triggers that we care about both ways, both in terms of acceleration and card advantage. Clackbridge Troll is next. God, I love this card. This is from Throne of Eldraine, 3 and double black for an 8/8 troll with trample and haste. An 8/8 with trample and haste for 5. That's crazy. And when it enters, target opponent makes 3 0/1 white goat creature tokens, because it's the 3 Billy Goat Scruff and the troll. So, okay, sure, I'm into it so far. At the beginning of combat on your turn, any opponent may sacrifice a creature of their choice. And if a player does, we tap the troll, and we gain 3 life, and we draw a card. So yes, they've got 3 goats that they can sacrifice. So that's 3 different combats that the troll doesn't get to attack, during which they've lost a creature, we've gained life, and we've drawn a card. But this is a cool question. It's a decision that each opponent has to make. Maybe the first opponent in turn order has priority, and they say, I'm not going to sacrifice a creature because I'm not the one who made the goats. And they pass to opponent B, and opponent B doesn't want to sacrifice a creature anyway because maybe they're in a bad position in terms of blocking, and they want those goats as blockers. So they don't mind anyway. And, opponent C's got something they could sacrifice. So now it's to opponent C, and they're like, well, I don't want to give, us 3 life and a card, so I'm not going to sacrifice something anyway. Which means it's combat on our turn, and we have an 8/8 trample haste. Maybe the haste isn't relevant at this point, but the trample is always going to be. So being able to attack with our 8/8, pretty good. It just puts our opponents into a situation where they either have to give us life and card draw, or lose one of their creatures, or just hope that one of their other opponents will do the same thing, wasting their resources to help out the other players. It's fun decisions for our Oracle of Half-Truths. Next up, we have the Indulgent Tormentor. This is 3 and double black for a flying demon. That's a 5/3 that says at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card unless target opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice or pays 3 life. So kind of a similar position to put our opponents in that the Clackbridge Troll gives us, except that this one targets. We get to choose which opponent has to either sack one of their creatures or lose 3 life or let us draw a card. So we're saying, hey, are you willing to help out your other opponents by preventing us, one of your opponents, from drawing a card? And in order to do so, you have to either lose your life or lose a creature. Unless they care about losing their creatures, or I guess losing their life, they're going to be like, no, take your card. I don't want to put myself behind, even if this puts you a little ahead. And this is going to happen every upkeep that we have a Tormentor. Pretty good. Next, we have Risa Rael, Kingpin. This is a sweet card. 3, a blue, and a black for a 2/5 legendary human rogue with Death Touch, and when Risa enters, we take the initiative. Now, what is the initiative? Well, the initiative is a little bit of a complicated mechanic that we have right here. The initiative is a status that a player has. They have the initiative. Once someone takes the initiative, they get to keep it until another player does combat damage to them with 1 or more creatures, at which point the player that did the damage takes the initiative. And then the initiative just sort of gets passed around in that way. The only other way to take the initiative is to have a creature that says, when this creature enters, you take the initiative, enter under your control. Great. But what does the initiative give you? Well, when you take it, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have kept it until your next turn, you venture into the Undercity, which is, you go into this little dungeon. The Undercity is, you put a marker on the front room, the secret entrance, and you get its effect, which is Lay of the Land. Search your library for a basic land, put it in the battlefield, put it into your hand rather, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So you get to just draw a basic land, essentially, whatever one you need. And then every other turn you venture into the Undercity, which again either means you've had a creature enter that says when this creature enters, you take the initiative. You have taken the initiative from some other player who had it by doing combat damage to them with one of your creatures, or if you venture into the Undercity by just having the initiative at the start of your upkeep, you just get to do that. You will take your marker and move it into a room below. You can't move to any other room. It has to go to one of the rooms that's connected, so secret entrance can only go to the Lost Well or the Forge, and then you just follow it until you get to the Throne of the Dead 3, and you're done. And if you venture into the dungeon after that, or into the Undercity, you'll start back up the secret entrance and do it again. Keep getting a little bit of value every time. The route I like to take with this deck, after the secret entrance, you can go to the Forge and trap if you want, but I like to go to the Lost Well and scry a little bit because card selection is so important in this deck, and then go to the arena, protect myself from a creature by goading it so it can't attack us and has to attack someone else, and then go to the archives and draw a card, and then Throne of the Dead 3 and reveal the top 10, put a creature from among them onto the battlefield with 3 1/1 counters and give it hexproof until end of turn, then shuffle. Pretty good. Being able to do the initiative is not a mechanic that everyone in Magic loves, but I think it's very strong. And with Rilsa, I'm sorry, I keep mispronouncing her name, Risa Rael, gives us the ability to go into it in our deck where we are reanimating cards, blinking them, bouncing them and replaying them. So Rilsa is likely to enter and give us the initiative multiple times if we're not just getting to continue venturing into the Undercity simply by either stealing the initiative from another player or just holding on to it until our next turn. And Rilsa says, whenever we attack, target attacking creature gains death touch until end of turn. That's already solid. And if we've completed a dungeon, meaning the Undercity, that creature also gets +5/+0, first strike, and menace until end of turn. So Rilsa's in this section because she draws us a land when she first comes in, at the very least, but also gives us so many ways to be evasive, to be more powerful with our creatures, to kill off our opponent's stuff, and she has Death Touch herself. As a 2/5, a terrific blocking stat. Yeah, we love Rilsa. Next we have Anti-Causal Vestige. This is 6 generic mana for a 7/5 Eldrazi from Edge of Eternities that says when it leaves the battlefield, we draw a card, and then we may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands we control from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. So this could be acceleration. We could just put a land into hand, from our hand into play if we want to when this leaves the battlefield. But hopefully we have a sweet creature that we did not choose to play because we want to let our Vestige leave the battlefield, and then put that creature into play because it's got a mana value no greater than the number of lands we have. Pretty solid. But Anti-Causal Vestige also has Warp for 4 generic mana, meaning we can cast it for its Warp cost. When we do, it enters, and it creates a delayed trigger that will exile it at the beginning of our next end step, and give us permission to cast it from exile on a later turn. So similarly to what we would do with an adventure. It just has to be on a later turn. So by warping it in for 4, we can ensure that at the end step, it's going to leave the battlefield and get its leaves the battlefield trigger. And then we can do that again later for its regular cost, and then have it leave the battlefield by dying in combat, since it's a 7/5. But we can also do a fun trick with it, where we warp it in, and then we flicker it. If we've got a flicker effect, we can blink this, it will leave the battlefield as part of the blink, then re-enter, and its delayed trigger from us having warped it in will not be able to find it at the end step because it is re-entered as a new game object. So we cheated on mana, we got whatever other value we got from the flicker, and we got to get its leaves the battlefield trigger. Nice. We've got Season of Weaving next. We've already seen Season of Weaving. I just want to call out the fact that this draw effect seems like it's less powerful than doing a 2 and a 3 here, which can be really strong, but if we don't need the Wrath, drawing 1, 3, or 5 cards is always going to be great, even with our 6 mana spell. And then Sepulchral Primordial is last. This is 5 and double black for a 5/4 Avatar with Intimidate, which is sort of like a precursor to Menace. It can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or creatures that share a color with it. Meaning, since it's mono black, creatures that have black in their color, it doesn't mean necessarily their color identity, but if they have either in their color indicator or in their casting cost any black pips, they are a black creature, so they can block it. But if an opponent is playing, mono green and doesn't have any artifact creatures, they can't block the Primordial. So 5/4 unblockable seems pretty good. Especially when it enters, for each opponent, we may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So, assuming our opponents have creatures in their graveyards, this might be pay 7 mana, get a 5/4 Intimidate, and 3 other things. And that happens every time this enters, whether we reanimate it, blink it, cast it, whatever we've got to do. It can give us an awful lot of value from this Primordial. Very cool. So that covers our card advantage section. Next up, we've got our acceleration section, which again I've just shorthanded as ramp. Of course, we're running Soul Ring. It's a 1 mana artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. This is just extremely powerful, fast mana. We want to have it in our deck because we do have a lot of big, expensive spells that we want to reanimate, so being able to just straight up cast them with our Soul Ring mana is pretty good. Wayfarer's Bauble is next. This is 1 generic mana for an artifact that if we pay 2, tap, and sack it, we can Rampant Growth. Search for basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So I love to run Wayfarer's Bauble because it's so cheap. It is the same cost to activate it, mana-wise, as Rampant Growth, which is what it does, even though it costs 1 more to cast it in the first place, but we could do that on a separate turn. So giving us access for 1 mana to a Rampant Growth that doesn't cost more than Rampant Growth itself in a deck that doesn't have green, yeah, we love that. And it puts it in our graveyard. We could bring this back somehow. I don't think we probably need to. There's better things to do that with. Next we have Arcane Signet, another basically auto-include, 2 generic mana for an artifact that comes in untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So in this case, blue or black. Yeah, of course we're running Arcane Signet. It's an untapped 2-mana rock. That's very strong for us. We would run this if this was a tapped rock that only made one of our colors. In fact, we are. That's Charcoal Diamond. This is a 2-mana artifact that comes in tapped and only taps for black. That's great. We're also running Sky Diamond, which is exactly the same card, but it makes blue instead. Yeah, they're 2 mana. They are tapped, but they are mana rocks, and so that's a very efficient way for us to get mana, and that sounds good to me. But what about another mana rock that is untapped, like Demir's Signet? This is too generic for an artifact that comes in untapped, and we do have to pay a mana into it to tap it for a blue and a black. So we are tapping 2 mana sources, whatever we're tapping to pay into the Signet and the Signet itself, for 2 mana, but it filters our mana. It fixes us, it gives us what we need in basically every instance. So yeah, we can't tap it at all if we don't have mana to put into it, but that's not usually that much of a problem. We have Poo Poo UFO next. This is a Final Fantasy card for 2 generic mana. It's a 0/4 artifact creature construct alien. I don't know Final Fantasy, so I have no idea what's going on here, but I assume it's pretty good because the card is pretty good. It's a flyer, so an 0/4 flyer is a solid blocker that lets us tap it to put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. With as much card advantage as we've already seen we have, and card advantage that we repeatedly have from our commander, a lot of the time we're going to our end step and saying, oh, I'm gonna have to discard some cards. Maybe I should discard some of these many lands I have in play or in my hand. The UFO allows us to, once per turn, and not even on our turn, since this can be activated at instant speed, it allows us to take the cards that are in our hand, these lands that we don't necessarily want to discard, and put them into play. So it could be, depending on how our game plays out, that this card is an 0/4 flyer that during the end step of our opponent to the right gives us a second land drop every turn. That's pretty great. It also says if we pay 3, we can give it base power equal to the number of towns we control until end of turn. We have no towns in this deck, do not worry about that. It's here to ramp us. Next we have another 2-mana rock, it's Talisman of Dominance. 2 generic mana for an artifact that if we tap it, we can make a colorless mana, or we can tap it for blue or black if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. Which, as I usually say, we always are. Because if we don't need colorless mana, we just make colored, or if we don't need colored mana, we just make the colorless. If we want the colored mana, then that means we're usually not going to tap this for that unless we need it. And if we need that mana, then needing it is the difference between casting a spell or not being able to cast that spell for its colored mana cost. Which means, are we willing to pay 1 life to cast an extra spell we wouldn't otherwise have been able to cast this turn? I would absolutely pay 1 life to cast an extra spell multiple turns during a game, even if it kills me, because every spell we cast is 1 step closer to us being likely to win that game. So Talisman of Dominance, paying that damage, we got 40 life. We're fine. We can pay that life. And if we don't have to, we don't need to. Just make the colorless mana. Great. Next up, we have Burnished Heart. I love any deck I get to run Burnished Heart in, and this is a Reanimator deck, so it works for us. This is 3 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature, Elk. Looks so lovely. That says if we pay 3 and sacrifice it, we get to Explosive Vegetation, which is a double rampant growth. We search for 2 basics, put them both on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So the usual play pattern with Burnished Heart is you play it, and then you hold 3 mana up until an opponent attacks you, and then if their creature doesn't have trample that they're attacking with, you block it with the Burnished Heart, and before damage, sack the heart. So now that creature is still blocked, so you don't take any damage. The heart goes to your graveyard, and you got its value out of it by getting 2 more lands into play that you get to untap with on your turn, and then use that mana. But with this deck, it's a great way to... It's slow, don't get me wrong, in the same way that Wayfarer's Bauble is costing us a total of 3 to Rampant Growth, Burnished Heart is costing us a total of 6 to Explosive Vegetation. So it's sort of like the same kind of rate, but because it's a creature, we can, if we don't have anything better to reanimate this, sack it again, and get even more lands. Which, if we do that a few times, we are thinning our deck, which is not really relevant for a commander deck, but it does, hopefully, make it more likely that we're going to get a non-land into our hand. And at the very least, we've got this creature in our graveyard, which might be relevant for us in other ways. We've seen the Midnight Clock, taps for blue, we love that. Solemn Simulacrum, Rampant Growth just when it comes in, and Anti-Causal Vestige can put a permanent into play for us when it leaves the battlefield, which itself could be a land. Nice. That covers our acceleration section. let's talk now about interaction. Again, just tagged as removal. So Black Sun's Twilight is a removal spell that can also reanimate things. Bitter Triumph is a removal spell, kills a creature or planeswalker as long as we pay an extra 3 life or discard a card, which we probably want to do. And next we have Feed the Swarm, which I love that the new Strixhaven Mystical Archive Feed the Swarm has Grist on it. So cool. Don't be confused. This is Grist, the insect planeswalker. I don't know who this is, just one of the many bugs. Yeah, Grist is little. Anyway, 1 and a black for a sorcery that says destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, and you lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. So we can hit enchantments with this. That's pretty good in a blue-black deck. We can also hit creatures, of course, and it costs us some life, but that's worth paying. We've seen Crystal Shard. We can use this to bounce our opponent's stuff if they don't have any mana or they're not willing to pay it. So that's removal. Imprisoned in the Moon is next. This is an enchantment, an aura, for 2 and a blue, that enchants a creature, land, or planeswalker and makes that permanent into a colorless land that taps for colorless mana and causes it to lose all other card types and abilities. This is terrific. This is my selection for the best way in blue to shut down a commander. Because if an opponent has a commander that is giving them a lot of value, or like a Voya, or even like a Tatiova, you make their commander into a land. And if they don't have a way to interact with their own lands or with enchantments, then their commander is locked down until they get one of those things or can contrive a deal with an opponent, maybe even us, to get rid of Imprisoned in the Moon. So it does give them a little bit of acceleration in the form of colorless mana production, but we have locked down probably their most powerful creature, which does not have to be their commander. It can be, but we can also just turn their Galta into a land rather than a big 12/12 trampler. That sounds good too. Or we can hit planeswalkers with it. Or we could turn off one of their problematic non-basics if they have something like that. That works. We've seen Hostage Taker gets rid of an artifact or a creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield, or until we cast it. Indulgent Tormentor can cause opponents to sacrifice creatures, as can the Eldest Reborn cause them to sacrifice creatures or planeswalkers. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering just destroys a creature or planeswalker. Noxious Gearhulk is 4 and double black for a 5/4 artifact creature construct with menace that says when it enters, we can destroy another target creature, and if a creature is destroyed this way, we gain life equal to its toughness. So a little bit more life gain, not usually a thing we're doing in blue-black, but it's here. And it just blows up a creature, but it's on a creature. So this is a bigger, I'm saying this even though I know the Gearhulk was printed earlier than the Ravenous Chupacabra was, but this feels like a Chupacabra. It's 2 more mana for +3/+2 and menace and gaining life. And it's an artifact, which might even be relevant too. Anyway, a great card for us to reanimate, to blink, to recast, whatever we need in order to get its enters triggers over and over, and to attack with so that it gets back into the graveyard so that we can reanimate it and blow something else up. Our Hullbreaker Horror we've already seen. It lets us bounce not just non-land permanents, but also spells we don't control. And Virtue of Persistence has that Locthwain Scorn adventure that lets us give a creature -3/3 and gains us 2 life. Might as well. That covers our removal section. We have already seen one of our Wraths. We'll see the other one now. Season of Weaving we've already seen. Lets us bounce every non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. But we also run Massacre Worm. Not exactly a perfect Wrath, just like Season of Weaving, but a pretty scary creature in the process. This is 3 and triple black for a 6/5 Phyrexian Worm that says when it enters, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. We do this, and maybe we blink it in the same turn. Now, all those creatures have gotten it twice, so everything that's an X4 is dead. Pretty great. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. So a way to drain our opponents, a way to remove a lot of our opponent's creatures, especially the small ones, and we can recur this, we can bounce it and recast it, we can flicker it, whatever we need to do with the Massacre Worm. Love it. And that covers the support sections of our deck. We're going to cover just a few more that supplement our deck right now, starting with this Starfield Vocalist. This is 3 and a blue for a 3/4 human bard that says if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So basically a Panharmonicon effect as a singer. Neat. So if we've got the Starfield Vocalist in play, when Massacre Worm enters, Massacre Worm is going to do this effect. All of our opponent's creatures get -2/-2 twice. So everything will have -4/-4. And if we do the thing we just said where we flicker this, that's an additional -4/-4. And that's just like, what an incredible board wipe that is. Everything gets -8/-8. That's not one of our creatures. Love it. Thanks, Starfield Vocalist. But of course, the Vocalist also helps us with our own commander, because Atris comes in. That is, Atris is a permanent we control and is causing a triggered ability of itself, doesn't have to be itself though, to trigger. So that means also if we have like Gossip's Talent in play, Gossip's Talent cares about our creatures entering. So it would trigger twice if we have a creature enter with Starfield Vocalist in play. Yeah, lots of powerful triggers here that we can double up. And the Vocalist has Warp for 1 and a blue, just like our Anti-Causal Vestige does. If we want, we can do the trick with the Vocalist and warp it in and then flicker it and get whatever value we get out of that. But it's also fine to just say, I have enough mana to play a good creature and get a great interest trigger or a few interest triggers, including my commander, but I don't have 4 more mana to play the Vocalist. But I do have 2 more mana. So I can warp the Vocalist in, then play whatever else we want to do, maybe our commander, get its double triggers, and let the Vocalist go to exile, and we'll just cast it for its 4 mana cost on a later turn. Problem solved. That covers our synergy section. Let's go down to our payoff section. These are cards that reward us for what we were going to do anyway. So we've already seen Satoru. Satoru gives us the ability to draw cards whenever we have 1 or more non-token creatures enter the battlefield under our control, with them either having no mana spent to cast them, or if they weren't cast. So if we are reanimating our opponent's creatures or our own creatures, if we're stealing things in other ways that don't require casting, or if we're just flickering something. Candlekeep Sage draws us cards whenever a creature, our commander rather, enters or leaves the battlefield. Ninja Teen is in this section because whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. That seems good. We're gonna have creatures leaving the battlefield. Sir Conrad cares about creatures dying, which is going to happen, and creatures being put into a graveyard from somewhere other than the battlefield, and our creatures leaving the battlefield. So we're doing a lot of that with Sir Conrad. Dreadhound, similarly, if a creature dies or is put into a graveyard from a library, then we're going to have that happening too. And of course, this Polluted Cistern cares about 1 or more of our cards being put into our graveyard from our library. So all of these are giving us value in the form of usually our opponents getting drained with these 4, this is technically damage, but drain, or us drawing cards. That is our payoff section. Next up, we're going to look at that drain. These are all of the cards in our deck that give us ways to take our opponent's lives away. And we've seen all but one of them. The Polluted Cistern drains each opponent for 1 per each card type among the cards that when our cards are put from our graveyard into from our library into our graveyard. Got there. Massacre Worm drains each opponent for 2 whenever one of their creatures dies. Dreadhound and Sir Conrad have lots of ways to harm our opponents. And Ninja Teen, whenever one of our creatures leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. But we also have Gary. This is Grey Merchant of Asphodel, 3 and double black for a 2/4 zombie that says when it enters, each opponent loses X life, where X is our devotion to black, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. So what is devotion to black? That means we look at all of the cards we have in play, and every permanent that has a black pip in its casting cost, we add all those up, and that's our devotion to black. So if we have all 6 of these cards in play, and let's say we have both doors of this room unlocked, well then that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 would be our devotion to black. Gary would make each opponent lose 12 life, and if we have 3 opponents, we will gain 36 life, because that's all the life lost this way. Gary is very strong as a draw effect, and can honestly be a way for us to just kill our opponents. If we play him late enough, he might, with that drain, just kill someone. And if he doesn't, flickering him, bouncing him and recasting him, or just reanimating him, or cloning him by having him attack with, let's say, that Blade of Selves, the Myriad effect, or just copying him with a quasi-duplicate, or a kicked Rite of Replication can just end the game for everyone with Gary in play. Love this card. It can just do a lot for us in ways that, it doesn't seem like we're playing toward. We don't really care that much about drain, but it can absolutely add up. And so yeah, Gary helps us out a lot there. And that is our drain section. Let's talk now about the ways we have evasion. These are all cards that can make it so it's easy for us to get past our opponent's stuff. We've seen all but one of them. Gossip's Talent can make it so when we attack, one of our creatures power 3 or less can't be blocked. Allura can make it so when we attack, one of our creatures of any type that's attacking can't be blocked if we're willing to bounce it to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. Ninja Teen can give all of our creatures +1/+0 and Menace. Risa Rael can give one of our attacking creatures Death Touch and +5/+0 First Strike and specifically Menace during our end step, all that last if we've completed a dungeon. But we also run Wonder. This is 3 and a blue for a 2/2 incarnation with flying, who looks great. Volkenbaga art, love it. That says, as long as this card is in your graveyard and you control an island, creatures you control have flying. So this is the card I mentioned earlier, and I did name it, that we don't care about reanimating it. It's fine if we want to. We can just get our 2/2 flyer back if we want. But as long as we have an island, doesn't even have to be a basic island, just any island type to land, and Wonders in our graveyard, everything we have flies. And that's just very strong. A lot of people don't expect this kind of effect anymore. If they do, it's from Anger, the red version that gives everything haste. But yeah, Wonder in our graveyard, making everything fly, can really just win us the game sometimes. Love it. And that is the Evasion section. We've got one last section here, which is our Protection section. These are all ways to keep our stuff safe or to keep ourselves safe. And we've seen all of it. Hide on the Ceiling, Nephalia Scholar, Planar Incision. These are all blink effects that can be used at instant speed to protect our creatures or artifacts, depending on what they target. Gossip's Talent can make it so one of our attacking creatures with power 3 or less can't be blocked. Same for Allura, which means they're not going to die in combat. Similarly, Grazilax can make it so we can bounce our creatures when they get blocked, so they're not going to die in combat. And Crystal Shard is an instant speed bounce effect, which of course can also protect our creatures. That covers our protection section, which means it's time for our lands section, starting with our basic lands. We are, of course, running Theros Beyond Death lands. We are a little bit more black than we are blue. I wanted to make sure that the proportionality works out fine, and it's pretty good for these numbers, 7 islands, 11 swamps, and so that's what we're doing there. We're running Fetid Pools. This is a bicycle land. That means it is a tap land that has an island and swamp basic types, meaning inherently it taps for blue and black, which is sweet. It's a tapped typed dual that we can use if we want to cycle later. We can pay 2 generic and discard it to draw a card. Something we might do if we're desperate for land, or if it's just late game and we draw this and we would rather have something else in our hand. We don't need this anymore for land. So pretty nice for us, in addition to the fact that it is typed. It has the island and swamp types, which applies to anything that might care about that. For example, Wonder. If we have Fetid Pools in play, we do control an island, so it gives all of our creatures haste, or not haste, but flying if Wonder is also in the graveyard. We're running Drowned Catacomb. This is a check land. That means it is a land that taps for blue or black, and it enters tapped unless we control an island or a swamp. That includes all of our 18 basics, but also our Bicycle land and our Tango land, which you'll see soon, because the Fetid Pools is both an island and a swamp. So Drowned Catacomb, not caring about whether or not our land is basic, will come in untapped as long as we have any of those 20 cards in our deck, in play once it enters. So if we were to want to upgrade either of these, Fetid Pools, you might upgrade to Watery Grave, the shock land, much more expensive, and you can't cycle it, but could come in untapped. And Drowned Catacomb, I usually say for the check lands, you could upgrade to a slow land, which for this would be Shipwreck Marsh. Unfortunately, with the recent release of Secrets of Strixhaven, we've gotten more slow lands into standard, but we haven't seen the allied colors yet, so we may have to wait for Reality Fracture for those prices to go down. However, we're already paying $2 for the Drowned Catacomb, so hopefully those prices will come down soon. Next, we are running a creature land in this deck. I don't often run creature lands, but sometimes you just want something. This is a tap land called Restless Reef that taps for blue or black, and if we pay 2, a blue and a black, until end of turn, it becomes a 4/4 blue and black shark creature with Death Touch that is still a land, so pretty good as a nice surprise blocker or attacker. Death Touch, for all the reasons we've already discussed, is very nice. And when it attacks, target player mills 4 cards. So that doesn't necessarily have to be the defending player or even one of our opponents. We can mill those cards if we want to, and that can help us out in all the ways that we've seen with our reanimation. Pretty good. We are running Darkwater Catacombs. This is a filter land. We are not running the other blue-black filter land simply because it's so expensive at present time. Hopefully it'll go down. This is the same thing as our Dimir Signet, but on a land. Pay 1, tap, add a blue and a black. So everything we said about the Signet is true here too. Fixes our colors, seems good. We have 5 fixing lands. Command Tower is an untapped land that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, just like Arcane Signet. So yeah, it's an untapped dual land. It makes blue or black. That's exactly what we want. Sounds great. Path of Ancestry is similar in that it has that same text, but it comes in tapped. However, when we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. We don't have any other advisors in this deck, but we do have 9 other humans, so that seems pretty good. We are running Tainted Isle. Tainted Isle. This is a land that taps for colorless, or we can tap it for blue or black if we control a swamp. So a lot of the times this comes in and it's an untapped land for colorless, but eventually it's an untapped dual land. We just need any swamp in play, which includes our dual typed swamps. Pretty good. We are running Myriad Landscape as a little bit of acceleration. It is a tap land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So even though they come in tapped, and we have to pay to do so and sacrifice it, and it comes in tapped itself, this is 2 lands coming in for the 1 land drop we made, so it is slow acceleration, if you'll pardon the oxymoron. Not horrible. Similarly is Temple of the False God. It's not everyone's favorite land, but it's an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless mana. That's like Soul Ring. It's a soul land. We just can't activate it unless we have at least 4 other lands in play, so 5 or more including itself. So while this doesn't accelerate us when we most want it to, which is early game, it does help us mid and late game, and we have a lot of big creatures in this deck for our reanimation stuff that sometimes we just want to straight up cast. Temple of the False God can help us do that. Next we have Underground River. This is a pain land. It taps for colorless or for a blue or a black if we're willing to let it do a damage to us because it's just our talisman again. Talisman of Dominance on a land is just as good as Talisman of Dominance on its own, so yeah, we're running this. We have Choked Estuary. This is a reveal land. It taps for blue or black, and as it enters, if we reveal an island or swamp card from our hand, it'll come in untapped. Otherwise, it comes in tapped, which means it's part of this sort of, the different kinds of check lands that we've talked about before, the actual check land, the slow land. Reveal lands work for us as well, but again, we've got 20 cards in our deck that are islands and or swamps, so yeah, this is very likely for us to come in untapped, unless it's like our first or second turn, much of which of the time we don't necessarily need its mana untapped anyway. So yeah, if you want to upgrade a reveal land, I usually think the Verges are a good upgrade for that. Of course, expensive because they're being used in Standard, and they're just great lands, but Gloomlake Verge would be my pick for the upgrade for this. Temple of Deceit is a scry land, comes in tapped, makes our 2 colors, scries 1 when it comes in. Love it. Very simple, perennially reprinted, inexpensive, gives us a little selection. If you wanted to upgrade this to the Surveil land Undercity Sewers, it's much more expensive, but it gives us a little bit more value. It's dual typed. Surveil can help us with our graveyard. If not though, a dual land that gives us something, just a scry 1, is not nothing. And we've got Sunken Hollow. This is our Tango land. It's our other dual typed land, makes blue and black, and it enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands, which again, 18 basics in this deck. It's pretty likely that we're going to be able to get this to come in as an untapped dual, and if not, it's coming in early enough, it won't matter that it's coming in tapped as much. And again, we can upgrade this to a Watery Grave if we wanted to. Finally, we have 7 utility lands. Castle Vantris is a land that comes in tapped unless we control an island, and it taps for blue. We can also pay 2, double blue, and tap it to scry 2. A nice little mana sink for us that gives us good selection. Without putting those cards in our graveyard, totally still fine, because it gives us the ability to get down to what we're looking for or ensure that what we have found gets to stay on top so that we can get it. Demolition Field, usually the kind of groups that want a deck of this power level are not looking for an experience where they can lose their lands, where they have mana denial. But you do have to have an answer for some problematic non-basics. The examples I usually give are a Rogue's Passage in someone's Voltron deck, making their huge commander unblockable, or a Glacial Chasm, like a friend of mine runs. If you're trying to do damage to them and you can't, that land's gotta go. Something that either empowers their game plan too much or prevents us from executing ours is a fair threat to remove. And if you want to do so without denying the mana, Demolition Field's your best choice. This is an untapped land, taps for colorless, or if we pay 2, tap and sack it, we can destroy a non-basic that an opponent controls, and then that opponent gets to search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, assuming of course we have basics left in our libraries, and they should. And we can use that mana right away, so can they, but we've gotten rid of a problem, and the game is about interaction. So Demolition Field's a great way to do that, even at a table that might have problems with interaction that bothers a mana base. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is next. This is a simple land. It's a legendary land that if we tap it, it makes colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it, and each player loots. They draw a card and discard a card. This is a solid effect that's pretty good for anyone, but it's better for us, because drawing a card and being able to put a card that we either drew or that was already in our hand into our graveyard, since we take advantage of our graveyard more than most players, this is better for us than it is for everyone else, and yeah, it's solid. Also, it's easy to replace if it's something you don't want to include in this deck simply because it's a $3 land that doesn't make colors in our color identity. But also, if you do put this in your deck, it's a great card that can go in a lot of decks, so being able to use it multiple places works well for something you're having to spend a couple of dollars on. Next up is Mystic Sanctuary. This is a land that is an island. So we technically have 21 cards in this deck that are dual typed because this has a basic land type on it. So inherently, it taps for blue. And it enters tapped unless we control 3 or more other islands. So in this deck, it is possible this will come in untapped, but it might also come in tapped. It does look at islands though, so our other dual typed lands that are the island type count toward that. And when it enters untapped, we can put an instant or sorcery from our graveyard on top of our library. Now we're running a total of 12 of those, which is not a huge amount, but it's not nothing. So being able to get back something that is like a removal spell or a reanimation spell can be really great for us, and the cost of inclusion is so low, we might as well include it. Next we have Port of Carfell. This is from Kaldheim. I love Kaldheim. Oh, I guess this printing is Lost Caverns Vixalan, but originally it's from Kaldheim. This is a tap land, it taps for blue, and if we pay 3, a blue, and double black, and tap it, and sack it, so totally, all in, it's 7 mana and losing a land. But when we do so, we mill 4, and we can return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. It does come back tapped, but this is reanimation in our land base, albeit expensive, and that's pretty sweet. Sanctum of Eternity, another expensive card, actually $6 in our land base. Not something I would normally do, but it really helps this deck. An untapped land that taps for colorless, or if we pay 2 and tap it, we can return our commander that we own from the battlefield to our hand, but only during our turn. It does not say only at sorcery speed though, so we can use this to protect our commander, or just put our commander back in our hand to recast him so we can get his trigger again. Pretty sweet, and again, works in plenty of decks, so if you were to move it to a different deck, Sanctum of Eternity helps you out in a lot of ways. Finally, Mystic Sanctuary is originally from Throne of Eldraine and it has a basic type, comes in untapped if you have 3 lands other than it of that type when it enters, and if that's the case, it does something extra. We also have Witch's Cottage, does the same kind of thing. It is a swamp, so we actually have 22 cards in this deck that are basic typed, so it taps for black. It enters tapped unless we control 3 or more other swamps, and when it comes in untapped, we can put a target creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. Now that does not mean in our hand or back into play, but on top of your library, again, the cost of inclusion is so low, and that's getting us back a creature that we might want to either get back into our hand that we can cast next turn, put back on top of our library that we might want to put into... We might get an Atris trigger that after we've done this, so that we have our opponents having to make another choice. Oh, do we give them back their Metamorphosis Fanatic or something? Yeah, it adds to the fun, and so of course it goes in the deck. And that about sums it up. Thanks again to InKing727 for requesting this commander, as well for waiting for me to fit it into my weekly rotation, and congratulations on your engagement. I hope your fiancé likes this deck. If you'd like to request a commander deck, and you are the patient sort, tune in this Friday for a little more information on that. Yeah, if I can be a little coy. So thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe. Ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live. Consider maybe even becoming a member of this channel. And remember most of all that magic is fun. You should play more Magic.